It's every mother's worst nightmare, finding out that the child they've been carrying for the last 20 weeks is profoundly unwell and is likely not going to survive. Hi, my name is Joanna Howe and I'm a professor of law and Rhodes Scholar, and I've also been a mother 5 times and I've never had this diagnosis. But today on the Dr. Joe Show, I'm going to speak to Steph and Brad, a very brave couple who've just been through this and are going to share their story. So probably the most common comment I get on my social media is that if a mother is pregnant with a baby who has a condition which is incompatible with life and that baby's going to die, then the most compassionate thing to do is to have an abortion for the baby but also for the mother. Now, both of you have experienced having a baby who's incompatible with life. What would you say to that?
I think it's a really challenging question because I think every parent wants the best for their child. And when you think about a woman in the place of being offered an abortion, like I was myself at 24 weeks and 5 days pregnant, you're not going to take that decision lightly. There's a lot that goes into it. But I think you would just want to fight for that child that's in you. And I think that was what it was for Remy. We didn't know who he was, but we knew that we were going to fight for his life and we were going to accompany him, whether that was going to be a short amount of life or a long life. We were going to be there as long as it was, because I really believe it doesn't matter how long you've lived, that value comes in. And I'm going to switch over to Brad because he's really good at talking about this.
All I could think about when you were talking was how, like, when we received the news that if he did survive, which there was a very slim chance that he would probably be heavily disabled, not like mentally and physically. So my initial reaction to that was like, Lord, why is this happening to me? Like, why, like, even if my child is alive, why will it have such strong disabilities, like, just to experience this moment of like, this is my lot in life was the kind of thing that gets dumped on you. But then, of course, what we believe then has to kick in. And I think that's where, we then were able to make that choice to be truly compassionate, because compassion, in my understanding, is not to end suffering, but it's to enter into suffering with another. That's really what the word means. Passion means suffering and co means to be with. So it was more than, I suppose, an invitation to journey with someone for however long their life would be. And in doing that, we were able to experience something so wonderful, even though it was really hard, something that was noble and good. His short life was noble and good and brought so much joy and life to people. And that's because we entered into the suffering with him, as opposed to...
Yeah, we were in the race with him. We were not afraid of facing what could come.
We were afraid. But
I think that's what courage is, though. You do it when you're afraid. That's what I meant by that. Like, you just have to face it. And I think
would have been really hard is just the unknowing to be faced with this situation. So take us through it. You were pregnant with Remy, and it was actually at the 20-week scan that this bombshell was dropped on you.
Yeah.
And at that point, they can tell you it could look like this, it could look like that, but they can't tell you with certainty. And so there's this big cloud of unknowing around the future of your child. What was that like?
It was hard. So we had that initial scan and we had to go to another hospital to then get a more specific scan. And I suddenly felt like I had this ticking time bomb inside of me. And it was the way that they had talked about this baby, like, oh, if he survives till the next scan, then we can give intervention. And I started to think, oh, is he going to pass away before we can intervene? And what rights does this child have for medical intervention? And that's kind of when we learned a general rule that a baby must be of a certain weight before we can do that emergency cesarean to save their life as well.
And how much weight, how big was Remy?
At that point, according to the scan, he was 400 So this was the next scan we did at 24 weeks. He was 430 grams. But we found out later when he was born, he was actually 390 grams when that extra.
So,
yes, he was tiny.
So they wouldn't have done the procedure at all if he
hadn't come up.
grams.
So it's actually really fortunate that he was looking like he was weighing more
than what he really was.
Yeah, it's so arbitrary, isn't it? This designation of human rights. Because I've had another mother reach out to me whose child I think was 22 weeks. I hope I'm not getting that wrong, but 22 weeks, and the child was denied any medical care. I think this was in New South Wales. And so she carried her baby until he passed, but, 1 week later, and they would have done life-saving interventions. Yeah. And that child could live. And one of the influencers I follow, Leah Darrow, she's she's baby a mompreneur from America, I think. And her baby Sly was born at 22 weeks and is now thriving and home. Yeah. And I've watched that journey on social media. It's so arbitrary, isn't it?
And I think the irony for me, and I was discussing with another friend of mine once about it. She's a nurse, and she was sort of pointing out, well, like the time of viability is like different, or the age of viability is different to their actual size. And so, because I was sort of arguing, well, yes, he was over the age of viability, but he was the size of an 18-weeker. And she's like, well, that doesn't matter. And I'm like, well, according to what? Like, if that's his physical size, his physical dimensions because of his restriction, and obviously we don't understand all the ins and outs, we're not medical professionals, but it just seemed so strange that there are children larger than Remy who aren't medically viable. Like that's then my takeaway from that is that the only thing that made him viable or able to go through this procedure was his age, not his size or his health or anything. So coming back to what you were saying about the numbers, like that really is what it felt like when we kept kind of having, a new doctor come and talk with us when we were saying we want to birth him, and that's our decision. We kept having, I think they just really wanted us to know what we were getting into to help us really understand, because in the way they kept pitching it, it's about having as much control as you can in the situation. But if anything, it felt like the thing that made more sense to do was to kind of let go of control, because there was nothing that we could control about that situation. We just really had to give in to what was going on. And I suppose each day, even after he was born, it was very much what's happening today? Like it was.
Yeah.
So there's an acronym that gets bandied around to justify abortion of very sick babies, TFMR, but it's actually used to justify abortion of any kind up until birth, termination for medical reasons, TFMR. You were offered a TFMR. And what was that like for you, and what was your response?
To be completely honest, the way that it had been framed to me personally, I felt like abortion was now a rational choice. It was it wasn't sold to me. Like we agreed, they weren't pushing it on us. They were kind of saying, here are your options. You are God. You decide what happens. But obviously what we wanted was a healthy baby. So having to choose between, 3 options that none of which were particularly appealing. But the kind of draw card of the abortion was, you'll be able to fall pregnant again sooner, you'll be able to have less of a scar, less chance of fertility issues down the line, because essentially to save Remy's life, it wouldn't be a normal cesarean, it would be a vertical incision in order to get him out, and technicalities, because he was so premature, he hadn't even risen to like that engaged position or whatever in the uterus.
And so it meant we were told that we might not be able to have any more children as well, like if things didn't go right in the procedure. So we were also choosing potentially, in saving his life, having no children, because we might not be able to have any more, and then he might die. Yeah. And that was like... They
kind of said, if you're going to have one kid, don't have Remy. Like that was their whole thing. They didn't say it like that, but they were kind of saying, what about next pregnancy? But I said, I don't know if I'll fall pregnant again. There's a lot that goes into falling pregnant. We did naturally conceive, but you just don't know. I didn't go through my life expecting children or planning the children, but we were open. And in my framework of understanding it, that life was a gift given to me, and it was now our job to steward this life, whatever that meant. And it meant that we'd do also scientifically reasonable as well. But for me, that could never be ending that life specifically. It could, not the intention of it.
It's such a utilitarian framework, isn't it? In order to have the possibility of having another baby, your little perfect baby who's not unhealthy or sick or disabled, we kill this one now.
Yeah.
And
that really sums it up.
Sweep it under the rug.
A tragedy it would have been for us, because now, even though he died, we've gained so many things of blessings and love and community from choosing to give birth to him. Like, just even the people that rallied around us alone was like amazing, that people would be willing to be there for us, because we prayed in an online format with him every day. We invited people to come into his life. I think for me, it was a way of just getting him connection to the outside world, because, you know, as what ended up being, he never was able to leave the NICU. So this was the only way we could connect him with other people. But it meant that so many people, even people we had never met from like overseas, were rallying behind him and joining in this community of prayer. And it became something beautiful, even in his death, that there was this community of people who had known and loved Remy.
So I think some people would say that it's all well and good for you guys to choose to give birth to Remy and to then pray with him. But if you're not Christian or a person of faith, then it's your choice and you should be able to go for that abortion. What would be your response to someone like that?
I just think we didn't have the typical success story, right? Maybe the success story would be we had the baby, he went on to become the world's greatest pope and politician and superstar basketballer. But in his death was proof that you don't have to do things and provide in order to earn your right to be loved. And I think a lot of people struggle with knowing that they are loved. And there's open conversations with our friends. So we've had friends that have actually said, look, I don't think I'd be worthy to raise this child if they had a disability, you know, due to the medications I'm on, or due to the reality of their particular situation, or they'll feel like they don't have the support, or they're not qualified to be a good mother. So we've come to learn actually some really sad scenarios where people have had to have abortions, or they felt that they had to, because that was meant to be their way out, their way to freedom and their way to moving on. But abortion to me is almost like you're admitting I don't have the support, I can't do this, I'm not worthy. And it's not like...
It's not true.
It's not like, the truth. That's it. It's not the truth.
And and that would be my thought as well. Like, when it comes to people who aren't of faith, the reality is that Remy brought love and joy to people who didn't have faith. So it didn't matter whether they prayed or not. Like, there were people who were rooting behind him who also didn't pray, and who weren't people of faith, but still were impacted by his life. So I think the truth stands, as you were saying, that each life possesses a value in itself that can be brought to people. It wasn't us praying with him or us choosing to birth him that brought this value that he brought. It was just him, because of who he is, even being a sick child, that elicited love out of people, because that's what happens when you are just yourself. Like, you elicit love out of people. Just
going back to the abortion, it's not neutral. And I think we have to be brave in saying that it's not a neutral. I think people are saying, oh, it could be right for you, but wrong for someone else. But I just think it's involving that human being that has value already. So how do we then say, it just wouldn't make sense to say that, oh, your abortion was okay. And I think what I'm not saying is okay, though, are all those circumstances surrounding what leads up to the abortion. It was not okay that baby was sick. It was not okay that, there are mothers that feel unsupported. But even in my own situation, there was a lot that was not okay about what was happening. And saying no to the abortion doesn't mean that I'm now accepting all of those circumstances too. I'm still acknowledging the negative forces that took place. How is it that a child could be sick? Like, what kind of a world do we live in that babies are born sick? Like, Remy hadn't done anything wrong. And
I think the implication that removing the child through abortion would make things easier is a lie too, because we were actually able to grieve and heal from the whole process because we knew who he was, and we'd experienced him. But I think if you don't meet the child and you don't know them, like, I just suspect that there's an emptiness there. There's a something that feels missing that you can't then recognize
and acknowledge his life.
Yeah.
And I think
there's a dead baby either way, but one way involves honoring a life and witnessing a noble life.
And that was something that really struck me, because before this point I didn't want to be, this is my own healing, obviously I've grown, but I didn't want to be associated with, oh no, it was more than a miscarriage, I had more than a stillbirth, I had a child that lived. But I realized I fell into that trap of, this child needs to live in order for me to acknowledge his life. And I think he was the same child that when I carried him, from when we first saw that pregnancy test positive, there he was. Like, that was when he appeared on the scene, and that was when my, not obligation, but it's my joyful responsibility to his life appeared. So doing that abortion would just...
It would just destroy that responsibility.
That's it. I owed it to him. Yeah.
Were you terrified going into the emergency C-section?
It was terrifying, and all the staff, like all 30 or 40 of them in the operating theatre, you could feel the energy. It was palpable, but it was just incredibly glorious, joyful when this child was born.
Really?
It was. For me, I said, he's alive. Like that was the first question, and I was shaking even before the spinal kicks in and causes shaking anyway, but I was terrified beforehand, and the way things just unfolded, and he was born at exactly 11:11, and turns out a friend actually knew the person that was operating on us, and there was just so much that came together.
Unfortunately, there's no photograph of this, but he had actually come out in his amniotic sac, like it wasn't broken, which is also a really rare thing.
Auspicious, beautiful birth. And exactly at 11:11.
Wow.
I used to make a wish on a star, when I was a teenager at exactly that time, and wished for, stupid things. But this was like, now I know, like, he's my star now. And that's, it's just been the best. And sometimes people are like, oh, it's a tragedy, his life is tragedy. I said, no, his life was not the tragedy. Like, that was the joyful part. Sure, the means of his death is tragic, that he had a hard life, but he was surrounded by love, and we did not leave his side. He had medical, they fell in love with him. They were cheering for him. They, the tears were real, like everyone was crying when he passed away. It wasn't just us. And I knew that they loved him like I loved him, really, like those nurses round the clock. So there were so many opportunities to love in that. And we would have missed out big time. And now we can just move on from it. It's not I don't feel.
I mean, like it took a few years.
Of course, it takes time to heal.
Can I ask you, how many years has it been since Remy passed?
2.5.
Yeah, but it sounds like when I speak to you, there is just so much joy, and the trauma of losing a child, because that is traumatic objectively.
It is,
But I can see that there's so much grace and healing for you both in the way that you speak about him. And you've since welcomed another child into the world. So all of that doomsday prediction that you wouldn't be able to have a baby, you've been able to have Felicity. Was it very scary having Felicity, knowing what had happened to Remy? I
was so confident. Sorry, you wanted to say something?
Well, I just think it's another blessing, and you kind of go, well, thank goodness we gave birth to Remy, because of what had happened and how crazy the whole circumstance of the pregnancy was. And no one really knew what was going on with why Remy was born that way, but it meant they were going to take every precaution in
medically,
pregnancy medically. But if we hadn't given birth to Remy, we may have had a couple more pregnancies where a similar thing may have occurred before there was intervention.
Yeah.
Whereas now, because we had
such a severe case, we
were highlighted.
Yeah, and I was given medication to take.
We don't know for certain, but it could very well be that Remy's life is exactly why, him giving his life is why Felicity was able to.
Yeah, and we had new information.
Really
and so we were very closely monitored with that pregnancy, and there was just a lot there. But to be completely honest, I had a very confident pregnancy. I honestly just said, look, the most catastrophic thing happened. The child has died and we survived. So this child, I will savor every moment with her or him. I didn't know. Again, we just left it a surprise.
Yeah.
And I enjoyed the time I had with her while she was in my belly. Like that was, I just realized, I've got to count this time as well, because we don't know. But it was that place of, honestly, it was just confidence that, and I knew it could go either way. When she was born, I have to admit I was a bit hypervigilant, but that's
still a bit sometimes.
Sometimes,
like in the middle of the night, I'm like, is she breathing?
Yeah.
Like, oh, good.
And there's a level of normal.
That's so normal.
Yeah. So there's a level of normal as well.
I would sometimes go and just listen.
That's it.
When they're sleeping in their bath, leaning down, they're breathing.
Yeah, that's it.
And then you see a little move and you're like,
oh yes,
good.
that's it. Oh, you just
Yeah.
So
That's a first. That's particularly, I think, when you've got that first child sleeping next to your bed. But can I ask you, I think if you've had an abortion, you might not ever tell your subsequent children about that child who you aborted. Felicity, will you tell Felicity about Remy?
Absolutely.
I think she already knows about Remy, because this really beautiful thing happens. The other day, my mum has a picture of my grandmother who just passed away earlier this year and Remy just on a little thing at home, and we showed her the picture and straight away she's reaching for him and smiling. And, because of what we believe, we, really do believe he is with God, but we're suspicious that Felicity has seen him before, just the way that she looks in the quandary room, and people always say that about babies, but it was odd that she just leapt at a photograph of her brother. It was really
beautiful,
really lovely.
And she's probably heard you speak about Remy.
Yeah, sometimes she smiles, and it is a sadness too to, she'll grow and find out that there was a brother that she didn't meet and couldn't meet. But I think that will be hopefully part of her legacy too, that she can know that she had a brother who was so brave and he was a real, soldier, warrior. Yeah.
She has family members who have met him more than just us. I think that's also he still feels like part of the family. Still include him in the little Christmas card signatures.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
And things like that.
Because he was your son.
Absolutely,
and your first son. And I do think that we're so quick to just try and eradicate all kind of suffering or pain. We run away from it. I was born in this, my father died when I was 5 and, raised by a single mum, and there was a whole lot of challenges associated with that, and people think, how traumatic that must have been. But I think you just learn through all of the suffering and the pain. It's not like taking it away makes it any better or easier. It's confronting it. And I think when I hear your story, you ran head on into it. You didn't want to push it over there because obviously the abortion would have been quicker. But you would never have met Remy and had the time.
Yeah.
Can you tell me after the birth how long Remy lived for and what was that time period like?
53 days or almost 7 weeks.
Wow.
And
did they think he would live that long?
No, he was a record breaker. To this day, doctors he's a once in a lifetime event. He is truly.
And I think that also kind of showed he had a will to live, even though he wasn't going to make it. He did have a will to live, and I guess having the opportunity to, it was painful, even took us, it wasn't until a week before I think you could hold him, or however many days.
To wait 10 days, and then it was another 22 days before I held him after that. So I was counting the moments.
And
you could hold him.
It really, it is so challenging to just be so close and so far at the same time. But we got to witness him doing things that babies do in the utero, opening his eyes for the first time. It was such a miracle to see, well, first of all, how much medical equipment is required just to replicate the female body, first of all, and it doesn't even do a good job, comparatively. And then on top of that, just to witness, this growing child, because now he was able to grow, yes, unhealthily, but he was then showing these signs of development that happen in the womb, and you just really get a sense of the beauty of the mystery of life when you were watching him. And
And the marvels of science and medicine, what people can do and how we can adapt. He had a little physio to help him with his little hands that were getting jammed in certain positions. And it was fantastic. He had a dietitian, and it was just a really holistic way of living, We thought about
he even
all
had
of those things.
Like a little bit of caffeine every day. So he had morning coffee. It was like...
It was cute.
And so holding him for the first time, what was that like?
Absolutely incredible. Yeah, it was sort of a bit COVID era too. So, there were masks and things, and he just went on my chest and I instantly started crying. And the nurse was like, hold still, you can't move too much. Like his cords are going. It was quite funny.
It just healed so many wounds in my heart to hold him. Like it was just so, it was a really good moment to do that. And I didn't get as many times, so I was really special.
You got 3 cuddles and I got 4,
You got 3 cuddles.
The last one was pretty traumatic, though. We had to resuscitate him a few times.
Yeah.
But anyway.
But do you think... So, sorry.
That's okay.
It's quite moving, isn't it?
Yeah.
So, you held him 3 times. You held him 4 times. Do you think he knew you were his mum and dad?
Absolutely. Now that I've seen a baby that's developing at a normal pace, I guess, like Felicity, in the way it took her a while before she could look at us in the eyes, but Remy did that. I remember he stared at me and we had this eye contact, and he definitely knew who we were. And even the nurses commented, like sometimes they'd call us in the middle of the night because there's nowhere for you to stay at the hospital bedside. Like there's an emergency bed you can sometimes stay in, so it was wonderful. But they called us in the middle of the night, 2 a.m. So we rushed into the hospital, and his vital signs, as soon as we started praying with him, just being there, talking to him, they improved. And the nurses just said, he just needed his parents.
Yeah.
And that's, that's a practical, we didn't make that up.
His vital signs improved.
When we were there. He knew when we were around, he knew our voice.
Sing to him as well, a lot. So, you don't really know, but I don't know. I feel like as a parent, you kind of know. You just have the connection there. Before I was a parent, I just didn't understand or believe that there was some weird connection that you have, but there is. There is some
your
connection.
child.
But I think what breaks my heart is that there are all of these babies like Remy who never get that because they do just get abandoned. They just
abandoned. That's sad.
They're in the place where they're safest, and then they're injected with potassium chloride, because typically at 24, 25 weeks, that is the way the abortion would happen. And that injection of potassium chloride is into their heart. And then they just never get that feeling of being with their mum and dad. Do you ever think about that, or do you?
As I've met other women actually that have had abortions, and I don't even feel like it's the women that have abortions. I'm sorry, it's the circumstances that they're in. There's a lot.
Society and the medical profession has this view that if there's something wrong, let's go to abortion. Yeah,
and I meet them, and it's just really hard because it's so common. Literally everyone now. It wasn't a conversation I knew, but just recently, having gone through this experience and now sharing and being more open about it, that's when so many people in my life have come forward. And deep down, I think people know and acknowledge that there is a life, and it's just that life gets so hard on the outside. It looks like the fix. It looks like that was the fix, right? And people regret it.
I think coming back to what you said earlier about people needing to feel that they're loved, I think that in our current culture, there's a distance and removal of people from each other as well. We couldn't have done what we did without the people in our community and our families supporting us. It was really challenging, but that's part of what we are trying to do now, is we're trying to be people that can be present for.
We want to be the village,
families in that situation, because really part of the solution, I think, to end abortion is actually just creating communities of deeper love. But you can't create communities of deeper love if you have an attitude of utilitarianism towards people too. And that goes for the elderly, it goes for sick people with Down syndrome. Pro-life is more than just in the womb too.
Could I push back?
Yeah.
What about people who might say you were selfish, that you forced Remy to suffer for 53 days?
And there's no doubt some of the medical staff probably had that feeling. There are different ethics that surround end-of-life care and also, but I really believe we were so measured in our approach as well.
I suppose the language of like, extraordinary means of care. And I guess for Remy, for pretty much most of his life, it was pretty extraordinary. There was a period when it looked like he was improving, and then maybe longer where he wasn't. And I just don't know if it's fair to say that a person's life is their own either. The mantra maybe of the pro-abortion side is my body, my choice, but our mantra instead is my body for you, because really, like, we did suffer with him. It wasn't like we were there watching him suffer.
Yeah, so should we have been killed because we were then in extreme stress?
To end our stress,
yeah.
But there's suffering would have occurred in this situation regardless of whether we had an abortion or not. So, but then to choose to enter into it, to accept it, and to let it shape and transform us is how we've been able to heal and even, have the grace of not having to, like, we were ready to end life support and getting to that point, but we didn't have to because, Remy went just through a normal procedure of like cares that he would have. He had reached that point, and it just was the exact right moment. My parents were there, your parents were there. We were able to grieve together. His passing, all these other things just sort of like made it so peaceful and lovely. And what more should our taxes, our money, these healthcare things go to than to, like, of course, to heal people, but like to provide like a beautiful way of death for people. Like, I don't think that speeding things up always makes it better.
I think you said it really well when you said Remy would have suffered either way, but this way he didn't suffer alone.
That's
his
it.
parents
We were there right
into
there.
the suffering with
Yeah.
him. And, I think that I know when I'm in pain, having someone with me is transformative. So for little Remy, having his mum and dad by his side would have been so profoundly comforting. I think it must be hurtful sometimes for you guys to see the commentary online and to see how little regard is given to babies who are profoundly disabled or sick.
Yeah, there was one particular comment that did upset me. It was actually directed at me personally, being like, "Oh, I hope you get pregnant and it's a complicated pregnancy and that you die as a result." And I just laughed, and I was also hurt because I'm like, we were there. We literally are that textbook case of here's a complicated pregnancy. If the baby remains, there could be other implications for us, but we also must save his life. We were literally that case. And this person was still quite adamant that, oh no, you haven't been there. You can't speak for this. And and
it only bothers me to a point. Like, I think it is hurtful when people say hurtful things. But my main gut reaction is usually this person just probably needs a hug. And like, that's what I was meaning by like, it's our culture. Like, we actually just kind of have to love better. Everyone.
And it's one heart and mind at a time, because every person has a different story as to why they think that is the solution. And it's not taking, like, we had a lot of people saying, I hope you get raped and you're in this difficult situation. And, there's been haters out there, but the concept is that we are connected as humanity. It doesn't matter what particular kind of suffering we've had, but it hurts all of us when we are hurt. And that's kind of, and I think us losing Remy and going through that has actually impacted other people. And
I don't know if this is worth sharing either, but after him passing, we were invited to go on a retreat for infertile couples, which was new. Like, it happened before, but we were invited, not necessarily being infertile, because the people who organized it knew us and they knew that we were suffering and we just maybe needed something in this time. And it was really humbling to be part of this group and to see the suffering of others a suffering that, at that point we didn't know whether we could have another kid or not, but it was, possible that we could have, and we did. But even just to recognize that, our own journey was different to these other people's journey. They weren't even able to conceive, and there's so much pain there. But that I feel like there's this weird cultural lie thing where it's like, oh, you don't understand my suffering. And maybe like that's what I used to do a lot as well. I used to, when I had suffering, if it wasn't the same and someone was trying to empathize, I'd be like, well, you don't understand because you don't understand my particular thing. And to some level, I can't understand what it means to be infertile, but I also was recognizing that these people can also understand that we have pain too in their pain, and vice versa. And I actually experienced this sense of unity, even though it was different, because I was letting go of my own pride that actually some people had said some things to me that about their own miscarriages shortly after Remy's birth that made me feel upset and angry, because I know that's not the same situation, but I think that was just me being hurt and not willing to be open. But once I was more open, then I could see actually we can unite with each other, all our different experiences. It doesn't have to be the exact same, which I think is another isolating tactic often the pro-abortion side uses is, well, you don't know this woman's story. It's like, no one knows this woman's story but this woman. Like, it's not possible, but we can unite in our stories, and that's where the healing
and I think
comes from.
There's it's a sad universal, but I'm pretty sure in every culture, everyone would agree that the death of a child is tragic. And that includes the children that have been aborted. And they were children, like they were someone's child. And so my heart really does go out to people that have had abortions, and families and couples that have had abortion. It's not just the women. It's because they're actually carrying the same grief that we carry with Remy. They've lost children. And whether we want to acknowledge that or not is another story, but it's universal.
Yeah. Thank you so much to both of you for coming in and sharing Remy's story. Remy is just such a gift to all of us, because I think that his life will actually save countless lives, because there'll be couples out there watching the two of you and hearing this and realising that abortion may seem like the quick fix, but ultimately what you chose was the more fulfilling, joy-filled path that's led to peace and healing for you as a family. So thank you for your courage and your witness.
Thanks.
Thanks, Joe.